Good morning. Can you hear us?
All right. Yes.
Wonderful. We can hear you too.
Good.
I will be advancing your PowerPoint when it comes time. I would probably recommend that until the time comes that you keep on mute just in case. Otherwise,
All
everything
right.
looks great and sounds great. Welcome.
Terrific. Thank you.
Kevin, can you hear us? Can you give me a quick mic test? Can we try that again? I'm not hearing you. I'm still not hearing you, Kevin.
How are you?
I think I'm the
All
only
right.
one who can hear you.
I hear both of you. Thank you.
Good.
Okay. Thanks for solving.
on this beautiful Halloween evening day. I'm going to take a roll call at this time. Mayor Pro Tem, are you here? Councilmember Ironbark? Yes, sir. Councilmember Anderson?
Present.
Councilmember Barnett? Councilmember Spears?
Here.
Councilmember Waddell? Chair is here. Start off, we have a presentation tomorrow evening, presentation of Employee Recognition Awards, consent agenda C1. C2 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a 3-year master license agreement with Dell Financial Services of Round Rock, Texas, for an annual cost not to exceed $200,000. C3 is a resolution awarding a construction contract to HGS LLC, DBA, better known as RES Environmental Operating Company, LLC, of Raleigh, North Carolina, in the amount of $542,427.70 for a stream restoration and stabilization project. Yes, sir, Mr. Rumbaugh.
Tony, the portion of this stream restoration that deals with Burnt Mill Creek in that Gibson Avenue area.
Yes, sir.
We've had, there's been a lot of talk from neighbors and over the years about Burnt Mill, flooding its banks. Is this just purely restoration for that section, or is this going to have any, I see Fred standing up.
I'm going to call on Fred
Good.
to come forward and talk to us about that. My initial reaction may not be the correct one.
Good morning.
Morning, Fred. You heard about, will this have any kind of a positive effect on stormwater management, or is this merely just a maintenance to shore up that section?
It's a rehab of that particular stream bank. So it's, the road is going to cave in, and the stream bank is severely eroded for a couple of 100 feet. So it's just in that one isolated area, in that one bank. And we'll look at the culvert that goes under Gibson to make sure it's in good shape. But it's primarily just a stream restoration.
Okay. Is there anything in the pipeline down the road to manage that stormwater better? Because, it has been a problem.
Do you mean for?
I'm talking about
Burnt Mill?
Burnt Mill Creek, the run of Burnt Mill Creek, Metz Avenue, Wallace Park, all the way out to its.
Yeah, we don't have anything planned for that right now. We're looking at Burnt Mill Creek in more of a holistic watershed approach, including stream bank, and where all the pipes tie to the creek, they typically slough off, which is occurring in another project with this same contract. But we don't have anything, we're not looking at any details right now of other areas of Burnt Mill Creek.
Okay.
Define slough for me.
Failing, falling off. It loses its support, its foundation, so it just drops off.
So but how help me with how that is making the problem worse? Is that just under the streets and stuff that you're talking about, beyond the banks, or it's affecting the erosion?
So what I was referring to is where the pipe ends and it discharges into the creek, and it's usually on a steep slope. And
So it erodes.
that's correct.
I got it.
The bank erodes, and so the support for the pipe is gone, so the pipe
So if you give it,
falls
if you
off.
gave it more fall, it wouldn't erode as much. Is that accurate?
So
Or how
if
would how do you fix that?
You support it with a structural foundation, and then you repair the channel bank so that it doesn't erode again, so it all gets held in
Rock
place.
or something?
Yeah,
riprap.
there's a lot of ways to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. C4 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina to provide nourishing food and education to families in need, utilizing $150,000 of American Rescue Plan Act funding. C5 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Salvation Army of Cape Fear for roadway construction, utilizing $1,300,000 of American Rescue Plan Act funding.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
this item has the address listed as 1120, and based upon a correspondence we got from the Salvation Army the other day, it should be changed to 1220. Those backup materials will be changed and handed out to you prior to the meeting on tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you. C6 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Dell Technologies to purchase Varnarus cybersecurity software. $147,000 is available in ARPA funds from first year. Okay. Public hearings, PH1 is an ordinance amending the official zoning map of the city of Wilmington to rezone property located at 107 Castle Street from CB Community Business to District to HDR Historic District Residential District. PH2 is an ordinance amending the Land Development Code, Chapter 18, for various amendments related to permitted uses, district-specific standards, use-specific standards, landscaping, alternative lot layouts, parking standards, administrative provisions, and measurements and definitions. And then PH3 is an ordinance amending the Land Development Code, Chapter 18, Article 5, Division 5, for various amendments to signage standards and to correct errors and inconsistencies found during implementation of the updated Land Development Code. Ordinances, none. Resolutions, none. So this concludes this part of the agenda. What else would you like to know?
We'll make you pay for it in late November.
I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This morning we have one presentation for you. It's a very important presentation. The folks with Intellect, who are the selected consultant to prepare the DE&I assessment and recommendations plan for us, have come to be with us in person today. This is the first time I've gotten the opportunity to meet them in person. And they are going to present the findings of the assessment and the recommendations. But before I turn it over to them, I'd like to give Tom Moten the opportunity to speak to this issue. Tom has been very closely involved with the project from the beginning and has been intimately and probably very personally involved with this as it goes along. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager and Mayor and members of council. Thank you for this opportunity. As you know, council directed staff to begin inculcating the Rise Together resolution into the fabric of the organization. And to do that, we wanted to understand where were the strengths, where we really excelled very well, and where there are opportunities for us to improve the organization. To that end, we engaged a nationally recognized firm that has expertise in organizational assessments that involved employee one-on-one meetings, surveys to the entire workforce. They met with members of council as well as members of the EMT team. Today, our intention is to give you a high-level summary of the recommendations as well as the findings, feedback, and over the next 2 weeks, that final report will be finalized and you'll receive it. One element that was just completed less than a couple weeks ago was meeting with 26 employees to get their reactions to the recommendations and their suggested focus areas that we should focus on first versus those we should perhaps wait till later. So again, I don't want to delay it, but I know it's been a long road. The work is important to the organization, and I'll let the members of the team, 3 of which are here in person, and 1 of which will be joining us via Zoom as a result of a prior obligation that that individual had made at this time. So without any further ado, let me bring them to the podium. And this is Kitty Watson, the founder of Intellect, and then she'll introduce her team as well.
Okay. It's good to see you all in person and to be here, and we know that we've all had an opportunity to meet with you. We have been on a journey together in the last year, and so we are here today to begin to help you understand what we've learned and then to listen to the recommendations. As we go through the presentation, this will be our presentation team. We've had a number of us that have been involved in this, and Tom just introduced me. Marilee Bollinger has been our project manager, and she's our diversity, equity, and inclusion practice lead. She's also the one that lived in Wilmington for 17 years and has a real understanding of the community. In addition to that, we have John Gregory, who has lived in North Carolina, served in the law enforcement, and then most recently was a chief of police in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and John Furcon, who's been very involved in work with diversity, equity, and inclusion for a number of years, and particularly within city government. And so the 4 of us will be presenting different parts today as we begin to share some of the more of the detail of the findings with you. And we have this agenda for you today, just to begin to think about, first of all, just to remind you, I know you have this in front of you, of the timeline and what we were working toward. We want to share where you are with some of the industry best practices and how we've incorporated those into what we're doing for the city of Wilmington. We will give you a high-level overview of the findings and themes that were recognized through the different kinds of research that we did. And then we want to highlight the recommendations. And as Tom just mentioned, we had a group of individuals, employees involved in looking at all of those and making more detailed recommendations for what they see is really important. One of the things that has been so important for us is the involvement of employees and how much they have been committed and interested in what is going on. And so wanted you just to know that it's been something that they've been willing and eager and interested in being a part of. And so finally, after that, we would like to open it up for any kinds of questions that you might have of us. And then we will have Mary and Joe will come on after that to begin to talk about next steps so that you can see what's going to happen after that. So I'm going to hand it over to John Gregory now, who's going to give us more of the timeline and where we are today.
Good morning. Again, we'll look at the assessment timeline, and we've done a lot in the short time. I say short time. With COVID, everything seems to be compressed. But we looked at overview. We started with the interviews with the council members and the EMT, which gave us a lot of insight about the city, a lot of insight about the workforce and the environment everybody works in. Secondly, I think it's important to note that there were 452 employees who actually volunteered to participate in the Rise Together survey. I think we can't discount that number because it is a very significant number. I think when we went from that point to the focus groups, that gave us more in-depth conversation with individuals, EMT members, employees at different levels, talking about how they see the organization and about specific issues that concern them and how they see the city of Wilmington and their involvement working with the city. Of course, you see that Tony and Tom had 2 community roundtables, which was part of the process. And we find ourselves where we are here in our landing place, the review and the DE&I analysis of the city policies and practices. And from there, I'll give you the timeline that we were working on. We started this in July, the review of the DE&I assessment and recommendations to the EMT. Followed just recently, we reviewed the findings with the EMT and got their input for the recommendations. And the DE&I Action Planning Group was formed together, and from that, where we find ourselves where we are today, we're going to review the DE&I assessment and recommendations with council. So we've done those 2 things. Like Tom mentioned just a moment ago, that there were 26 employees involved in that employee group, action group, and now we're here today, and the next step will be to complete the DE&I report with the Action Planning Group for the results. Thank you.
So, next slide, if you will, please. Hi, I'm Marilee Bollinger, and I regret that I'm on Zoom with you and not in person. My husband is having spinal surgery in Baltimore tomorrow, so that was a commitment I had to honor. But I'm pleasure to be with you. So let's go fast forward even into the future and look at this journey where you might be, you know, in the future. Based on the actions that you decide to take, because it's good to know where we are now, and it's also good to know where we headed and what are best practices. So these are just a few things. I won't read all of these for you, but I think I'll highlight some important ones. You know, first, ensuring leadership commitment at the top is key. The initiative can't go forward without that commitment from top leadership, and then it will cascade down. And we got a lot of feedback from employees saying they were waiting to see, was this going to be another flavor of the month, or was this going to be something the city really committed to at all levels. And then related to that, providing funding to support the DEI initiative so it continues to go forward is also a best practice. Holding leaders accountable for DEI outcomes that you establish, but also rewarding and recognizing leaders for being accountable for those objectives is very key to achieving those results because it stays top of mind for everyone. Taking action to address inconsistent policies and practices. You can have the best, most equitable policies, but if it's not really, if there's not accountability and commitment to those policies, it doesn't happen, as you all know. And also just enhancing communication with leadership, really building a culture of listening with a norm of encouraging diverse viewpoints. And that means also pivoting a little bit perhaps from just simple diversity training, which only goes so far, to really developing your leaders and coaching them in what it means to be inclusive, because inclusion is for everyone. And I repeat that, it's for everyone. Everyone needs to feel that they belong and that their voice is heard. So then the bottom points really are about measuring and having a DEI dashboard where you can actually track your outcomes and then do check-ins throughout the year, little pulse surveys, 5-10 question surveys so that you can adjust course. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show you this DEI maturity model, and this has been extensively researched. This is recent research from Burson, who's actually now a part of Deloitte. But they developed this model of DEI maturity, 4 different levels, okay? And as you can see, 40% of companies and organizations are at level 1. You can be operating at a very high level in some areas, but DEI is perhaps a newer focus for a lot of organizations. So that explains why so many are at level 1. Burson did a research project with 800 organizations analyzing 80 different practices correlated against key outcomes. And they arrived at these descriptions of the different levels. So level 1 is really kind of focused on just mitigating any problems that could come from compliance. There's not a comprehensive strategy for DEI. And at this stage, leaders may not really understand the power of DEI. People are looking just at diversity and not incorporating inclusion. And level 2 is so interesting because some very powerful things happen when you move to level 2. And we believe the city is really moving very assertively toward level 2. And you began that process when you began opening up the listening to this process of the assessment. That was a very courageous move to take and a big commitment. So now with those insights from the listening, you can begin to take actions. And the action is what it's all about to move you to level 2. And just, we could go into more of these levels and they're very interesting, but let's just focus on moving from level 1 to level 2 on the next slide. Look at these outcomes. You talk about quick wins for the city. Just by listening to your employees, hearing them, creating the place where they can speak honestly and with psychological safety so that they can really tell what their experiences are. If you listen to that and act on it, these are the kinds of outcomes you can expect. And they're kind of staggering. Employee sense of belonging goes to 71% just by moving up to level 2 and doing this listening tied to action. Workforce engagement and retention goes from 34% to 63%. This is just on the left slide. And on the right side, you've got 12 times more likely to engage and retain your employees when you truly listen and take action related to that listening. So you are just at a great starting place for moving to level 2, and all the insights we have gained from this listening exercise that you committed to If you'll take that, you can now go forward and start acting on those recommendations, which we will get into shortly. And I'm going to hand off to John Furcon.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to come in and talk to you in person and go over these results. What my colleagues have done thus far is to give you a sense of the bigger picture, the procedures we've used, what I would call the national standards in terms of moving forward on this diversity journey. Well, I have the pleasure of getting into some of the more specific details that will give you better insights into your own situation. So many of you are familiar with what's called a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you will soon receive a report that will probably be 80 or 100 pages of detail. And what we're trying to do this morning is to just give you some important glimpses into what you will find. And I'm happy to say that there is abundant evidence of strength. So if you're concerned that, wow, they're going to find all sorts of stuff and skeletons in the closet and blah, 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 well, we'll start here. And I really enjoy talking to a number of you in the council interviews, and then I had the opportunity to participate in all of the other data collection activities, read the details of the survey, and there was something like 800 comments, which we've carefully analyzed, and you'll hear more about that later. But just not to read all this to you, but to just give you some of the highlights that stood out for me at least. The fact that this council has moved forward with this initiative in the first place really says a lot about your dedication to the city and moving it forward. And there are specific examples that you refer to in our interviews with you, progress made by the police department and the Civil Service Commission and so on. And one of the things I found most striking was that your investment in not-for-profits, helping them find ways to do business with the city and grow. And this is very important as a concrete demonstration of your commitment to the community. We interviewed every member of the executive management team, and one of the big things that came up, at least to me, was the fact that the dedication of employees is very clearly evidenced. They really care, they want to do the right thing, they want to do a good job, and they're concerned about allocating their resources to get the best possible impact in the community. So that is certainly there. And a number of examples, for example, of bridge building with the community, involvement in community groups, et cetera, et cetera. In my background, I had the opportunity to lead a national survey group, and I was particularly interested in what your survey results would say. And as John Gregory pointed out a moment ago, nearly 500 employees participated in the survey, many online, a number in paper and pencil, because they're frontline workers and they're working with a shovel and a backhoe, and so they have to fill it out that way. And one of the strongest things that came up was the positive regard for coworkers, and how they are treated with respect by their direct supervisors. And that was very striking to me, and I think very impressive. So there's a lot of a positive cohesion and camaraderie. Not to say that everything is perfect and hunky-dory, because there are issues, and we'll get into that kind of detail, but there was a lot of strength to build from. Another thing that we did was to look at the policies and practices of the city, the handbooks, the adequacy of statements, and so on. And the revised employee handbook is one positive. The work that the police department has been doing, another. There's the public service crew manual. So a lot of positive examples in parks and recreation. So there's abundant evidence of strengths in our assessment of the city. Now that said, what are some opportunities for improvement? Well, your continuing support of all of this is extremely key, and I don't need to repeat that. Your participation in further strengthening ties with the community, strategic partnerships, and so on, and in fact becoming a place that other cities can model from. I think all of that is really part of what would be your brief. That's what we would encourage you to consider moving forward. The EMT takes special responsibility for their role, and they understand that they've got to demonstrate whatever it is we decide to do, because you don't lead by talk, you lead by action, and I think they understand that. And there have been investments in training, and that needs to continue. And the whole notion of how do you develop leaders that have this DE&I mindset as a part of their natural leadership process, I think that's a challenge. The survey and the focus groups called attention to the fact that they're looking to see evidence of leadership commitment. And there were a lot of specific things that people raised about, well, what is the equitability of pay around here? How are promotions made? You know, sometimes promotions are made and we didn't hear that there was an opening, and all of a sudden someone's got the job. And so there's a lot of opportunity there to improve HR practices, which is important to maintaining a dedicated, committed workforce. And again, people called attention to policies, and there may be a policy in writing, but to what extent is that uniformly applied going forward? Okay, so given that, I'd like to invite John Gregory back up to the podium to talk about some of the specific findings. And we've organized these into 7 themes, and he will pick up the baton and carry forward for a couple minutes.
Thank you, John. If you look at the first category, and I won't read everything up there, but personal experience themes, I think the first, before we start looking at the themes, it's impressive that there are 81 and 79% favorability on questions 2 and 4, if you look at those questions and the responses. But when you look at the survey results and the focus group results, you see there are pluralities in opinions about D&I initiative. Of course, that's to be expected in something like this. Yeah, I think no one's surprised by that. And then you look at polite and respectful in-person workplace, but there's still unexpressed feelings below the surface. I think you know we can be cordial, but there's also sometimes another story to that, and how we're treated is another issue sometimes. But those are things. But I think you could take solace in knowing that there are a lot of favorable things there that people see and working with the city. Let's look at category 2, hiring, recruiting, career development themes. Again, you have 2 favorable questions there at 64 and 62%, questions 12 and 5, if you look at those. They think they have opportunities regardless of their sexual orientation, and they believe the city is active seeking diverse candidates. But when you look at the themes that came from the DEI survey and the focus groups, you see there's confusion about best candidate. What is the best candidate, and who, when they're hired and promoted, that's a confusion about that. Then you look at, and then there's some that have fear or have concerns about hiring diverse candidates. And then the perception of favoritism or lack of transparency in career advancement. So those are things that another opportunity John talks about, opportunities that we can work on, but those things are there, and those are some of the common themes that came through. If we look at category 3, policies and procedure themes, 2 most favorable questions, again at 82 and 61%. People understand the procedures for reporting incidents of discrimination and bias in the workplace, which is good. People understand policy. They know what they should be doing. And the department has policies and procedures to encourage respect and diversity, promote inclusion. Didn't mean to read that, but I think that one was significant that those 2 questions were significant to read. Again, the themes that came through, this concern about it will equal preferential treatment, concerns that the D&I will result in that. That's a fear out there, a concern. The inconsistencies in how policies and practices are applied based on people's experiences. Those things, you have to really look at that because those things came through as themes in both the survey and focus groups. But concerns about compensation and benefits, and especially for hourly staff, those concerns that they have, and the perception of lack of transparency in promotional and hiring opportunities. I think John Farrakhan just mentioned that something similar to that in the SWAT opportunities. So again, these are all opportunities, but this is what we've gleaned from the information we received. And I'll turn it back over to John Farrakhan.
I'm glad that John Gregory mentioned that the business of the standards on these survey questions at the top of the slide, because in my experience, if you get 70 or 80% of your employees responding favorably to something, that's a definite strength. And 60% is actually good. But when you see numbers going to 50% or less, that's really a red signal on your dashboard saying that's something to particularly look at. And here I continue with the theme of diversity training, and you can see that people really want to know more about how to proceed. And as you know, it's one thing to hear the words, but it's quite another to figure out how do I put this into action? And what are my experiences? What have I had to see and do that helps me better understand what this is about? And notice that one of the less favorable replies about the educational programs the city has provided thus far. And you know that there has been investment in training, but apparently more investment needs to go in that direction. So the themes, as John has identified, those are the big cutting across the comments. And we use the term polarities. This means specifically a number of people have said, I don't know why we need any of this. I don't see a problem. I don't experience this. On the other hand, other people are saying, you know, it's uncomfortable in some ways for me to work here. We really need a better shared understanding of what this means and how we should go forward. So there are polarities, and then a lot of people in the middle saying, yeah, I guess there's something there, and it's an opportunity for us to do a better job. So the need and the adequacy of training is a continuing issue. But there is a lot of optimism that this can make a difference. And if I can put it this way, there's not a lot of what I would call die-hard resistance to the fact of doing this. It's more a question of, geez, do we have better use of our resources in this? And if it's important, help me understand why. And I'm willing to jump on the bandwagon if that's the case. So that's sort of a thumbnail on diversity training. Inclusion is an important thing because this gets at the sense of, do I belong to this work family? Am I a part of the people who work here? And some very strong results here, for example, the notion of how ethnic, religious, and so on slurs are not tolerated. So this is a very respectful workplace from that point of view. And also a good appreciation of people and differences in background. But there are perceptions of gaps in listening. Sometimes it's my supervisors don't listen to what I have to say or don't care what I have to say. Sometimes it's people in other work groups. So that's the theme number one. Number two is that there may be some groups that just don't get as much attention. What they say is kind of glossed over, or it takes another person to repeat what they said for it to register. The third is what will happen if we spend more time on this? Is there going to be a double standard or a backlash, or am I going to be disadvantaged? What about my career? I'm important. And then fourthly, you know, do these challenges really exist? So work needs to be done with respect to what is inclusion and why is it important. The whole notion of belonging to the workforce. Well, leadership is what it's all about, and a high level of regard for supervisors' commitment to this and how supervisors handle these issues. But again, can I count on my supervisors to really walk the talk? And there are differences in perception department by department. Some departments see themselves as sort of leading the way, other departments not so much so. There are what we call cultural norms. It's not polite maybe to talk about some of the stuff. I spent a number of hours with this 25-person employee feedback group that has been mentioned, and some of them said at the end of those meetings, they said, you know, we never have the opportunity to talk about this stuff in the way we've talked about it here, and we need more of this for people to talk about their personal experiences and what it means to them. So that's the notion of having better dialogue on these issues. And, you know, what is diversity? Some people see it as kind of narrowly race and gender, but as you know, there are 20 or 30 ways in which people can sort of say, well, he or she is different from me because. So how we define that is important. And then lastly, again, how do we see the city moving forward? Can they really create a more positive culture in this regard? Are there leaders in the city that I can relate to? And they're not just talking about city staff, they're also obviously talking about each of you. So there are positive views about that, but there are people also are aware of differences. And as you know, people are very mindful of what leaders are not just saying, but what leaders are doing. And there are challenges, and as the city manager has said, this is a long road. This is a journey. This takes years. It's not something that a consultant come in, give you a report, stamp it, we accept that, and off we go. No, that's only the first step in the journey, I'm afraid. So there are concerns about resistance, and so going forward, that's going to be the test of your commitment. Now, as a result of all of the above, we came up with a number of recommendations, a total of 10 major areas, and in particular, we're going to talk about 7 of them this morning. And so I'll go back to Dr. Watson, who will... Back to Marilee? Okay, sorry about that. Yes, she will talk about this first. Then we'll get to you.
Okay, this list shows the 10 categories, or what we call dimensions, of the city's DEI recommendations. And again, all of these were categorized based on the feedback that we received from those surveys, the 800 comments at the end of the surveys, and all of those hours with focus groups and employees and interviews. So as you can see, you can read these for yourselves. I won't read them, but dimensions 1 to 6 focus on actions to achieve DEI outcomes. And those numbers in the right show how many recommendations there are for each one of those categories or dimensions. So 200 is a lot of recommendations, but when you take it across 10 categories, you can see it's kind of averaging 20 each, with some having more than others. And then those are the recommendations that the employee group is putting into categories of importance, short-term and long-term. I wanted to also mention that we had this employee planning group. I participated in that with John Furcon as well as a co-facilitator, and we had 26 employees representing all of these different departments in the city. So we felt like we got a great cross-section of input and perspectives. And I just wanted to mention that the final 4 of these recommendations have to do with what we call core, rather than RISE DEI topics. And we weren't really going to focus on these topics, except that they really came to the fore when we were having discussions with people and in all the comments. So these are foundational and very important to, you were speaking of the Stormwater Foundation. These are like that framework that really supports you and gives you resilience to make all kinds of changes and react to crises and different changes that are ahead, that are unforeseen. So I wanted to mention too that some work has begun on some of these topics already, particularly the values dimension. Tony led an exercise already with the EMT to prioritize values for the city. And there was a very rich discussion on values with the EMT. Also, most importantly, identifying the behaviors that go with those values. And each department head took input from their employees on this. The Future Cities team worked on this. So in your November 18th meeting, you will be hearing more about the values dimensions and recommendations. Next slide, please. So this just shows you in a summary what topics the RISE DEI dimensions cover. So REACH is for community partners in the MWBE program. Inclusion, the I relates to culture and behavior. The S is for structure. That's the data benchmarks and the internal infrastructure that you give for DEI. And E is for equity and fair, consistent application of policies, practices, recruiting, promotion. So next slide, please. And this highlights the core dimensions as well that have to do with communication, opportunity, respect, and excellence. You can see the topics that fall under that. And I am now going to hand off to Kitty Watson.
We believe that probably what you're most interested in, I bring this back down to my level so that you can hear me. You're probably most interested in the recommendations that are related to what Marilee was just talking about with RISE. And what you see are there's 6 different recommendations that relate to the RISE initiative. And so I'm going to go through those briefly. I'm not going to go through 146 items, I promise you. But what we do want to do is give you a highlight of what those are, how it's been working, and what we've been doing with the action planning team. And so the first one was around structure and governance. And under that, you'll see that there are 4 different topic areas. Wonderful for the city already is that you've already been doing a number of different things in this area. As you know, the city is working on the strategic plan right now, and so the working in the DEI recommendations and how that might work with the help of the Action Planning Committee. There also have been a number of restructuring things that have happened that you are very aware of. And so, for example, with 1.3, HR and DEI office is now under one particular deputy city manager, Mary. So that also helps because it allows there to be that integration of thought and ideas and what is happening. I want to move to the next one, which is culture and behavior, and to give you an idea of how the Action Planning Committee worked. You'll see that under this, there were 28 recommendations, but under 6 different categories. And so you heard from John Furkan and others about the need for the story, the why. Why is this important? Why are we doing this? How does this affect me? And how is it good for all employees, not just one group of employees? And so with that Action Planning Committee, let's go and just show you how this worked a little bit. So this is just a template that was used with the Action Planning Committee, and you'll see the recommendations. And what Marilee and John Furkan did was to help individuals understand the recommendations, what they meant. The groups worked in small groups on each of the different recommendations, and then they looked at them in a small group and rated them based on this is something we need to do in the short term, which was 1 to 2 years, the long term, 3 to 5 years, or really we don't need to look at that priority. That's not something that's very important. And so then, once that small group looked through those, and you can see on the left-hand side how they rated the first one, for example, collaboratively build the why story, that the group really believed this was very important to look at now, short term. And then what they did was that everyone, the full 26 individuals, was able to vote themselves on that particular category. So it wasn't just a small group. The voices got to talk about it and then to go from there. So for example, here is one of the questions, and you can see how people voted, so that 90% of that group felt like to increase awareness and understanding of how DE&I impacts city's future to recruit businesses and employees. That's one of the things that we heard from the roundtables with the business leaders, for example, how important this is for recruiting people to come to the city of Wilmington, how important it is to retain people in the city of Wilmington. And so you see that the employees also thought this was really important. So for every different recommendation, this was something that was done with those employees. And they had a strong commitment to it, and were able to then have the city manager and the deputy city managers come and listen to the final comments last week, and to recognize the work that they'd put into this. And as you already heard from Marilee and John, the employees were just very committed to it. They want to stay involved. Many of them are talking about how can we continue to be a part of this. And it's those dialogue, the listening, as Marilee mentioned earlier, that the organizations that listen, understand, and truly act on what they have heard, that's when we believe that there's progress being made. So I'm going to go through these others just very briefly, just so that you can see them. You have them in front of you. So there were 39 recommendations around policies and practices, and I will say that already several things have been done with the employee handbook. Even while we were doing our assessment, that was something that was being done to make some revisions to that, and so we were looking at what was done previously. So there are already improvements being made in that area. There's some others, though, of course, that could be addressed as we move forward. Number 4 was around recruitment, selection, and promotion. And you see, again, a lot of this is just not having clarity about how it works. And this impacts all employees because there can be assumptions made and misunderstandings made. And so you see the different kinds of recommendations just with job descriptions for everyone and what those look like, or how people are promoted, what is needed there, and that's for everyone as well. And then some of the things that came up was with the community, of course, and some of the partnerships and how the community that we worked with, how much they want to be a part of what you're doing and what the city is doing. And so you'll see recommendations in that area, and how to build that trust within the community and the partnership. So again, I'm not going to go through every detail of that, but just want you to see the rigor that went into this and the commitment from employees. And finally, minority business engagement. This was something else that was brought up through the community and with working with the business leaders and thinking about how are we awarding contracts and opportunities? How are we engaging our community in some of these opportunities? And how do we let people know what's possible or available, both at the Tier 1 and Tier 2 level of spend? And so these are the things that can also have people want to be a part, bring new business into the city, and something to consider and look at. So what we've tried to do today is just to give you a broad overview of the journey we've been on with you. We've wanted to allow you to see some of the rigor with the themes so that you have a better understanding of that, and to look at the recommendations. And what we would like to do now is to open it up to any questions or comments that you might have that we would be able to answer or clarify for you.
Are there any questions from council? Yes, sir, Mr. Waddell.
First of all, thank you, the Intellect team, for being here and for the discussion. There was some reference to a DEI dashboard. I was just wondering, I guess, how and who aggregates that data? Has it already been aggregated by this process? And then how's it going to be accessed, and whom will have access to that dashboard?
That's going to be something that's going to be coming in the future. What happens is, and may I call you Luke?
Sure.
What happens is, based on the recommendations, there are some identified recommendations that would be a part of that dashboard. How are you going, what's important to you? You know, there's some basics with the dashboard that are around demographics, right? But there's some other things on the dashboard that you can look at with communication, for example, and how it's cascaded through the organization. You'll see when you get the final report, one of the recommendations for success factor is communication and how that's cascaded, almost a key communicator program that becomes really important. So the city will now take these recommendations that are prioritized and come up with a dashboard. We have worked with other organizations to establish those, and how often Marilee mentioned about pulse surveys as one way of doing that. But we truly believe that there are strategic listening architecture that organizations can have that are both qualitative and quantitative. And so we're happy to go into more detail if you're interested.
So really the dashboard, when it's referenced in here, is really more of a recommendations dashboard and best practices rather than a analytical data that has been aggregated.
Yes, not yet. I mean, you've got to decide what's most important, and the city will decide what's most important and how to measure your progress. What we've done is to give you kind of the foundation benchmark. And now and you can see that you're already moving, as Marilee talked about, from level 1 to level 2 through the listening that you're doing.
All right. Thanks for clarification.
Sure, thank you.
I was going to, in respect to the police department policies and the fire department policies, have you had an opportunity to even look at any of those policies?
We did. We looked at those as well, and working with both the chief of police and looking at the fire department too. There were recommendations that they brought up that they think would be good to consider, and so that's also in the final report.
And in the, I guess in your discussion with a lot of the employees that participated in this, I think it's almost 40% of our workforce that have participated in this process, building trust in the grievance and the appeal process, and the non-retaliation policy. Did you hear a lot of that?
I mean, I don't know what is a lot,
well,
but
out of the 40% that sat down to share with you openly how they felt.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that is a theme that I've heard over and over again is how people get promoted, how they get paid, do the best ideas float to the top.
Right.
If we have people that are, we're setting up for leadership positions in the future, does that block anybody else from opening, from an opening to be able to think? Because in my mind, I think the best ideas should float to the top. It should be a place where the best ideas that improve how we deliver services to our community in a more equitable way should be one of our overarching goals. And it seems like we're continuing to dredge over the same territory over and over and over again. How we get promoted, how do we make the process more open? Because there seems to be a lot of concern about that from what I've seen here.
There is, Bill, and I think part of it is, again, is just not having a clear understanding of that or talked about consistently of what that looks like. One of the things that you'll notice in the report, too, is recommendations for certain kinds of training that other people, or leadership development, not just training, leadership development. What does that look like with mentoring? What does that look like with opportunities to work on particular tasks for visibility? What does that look like for a career ladder, for example, so people know here is the projection of where it goes? What we've heard is policies was putting a position description out and not giving enough time for people to know about it, and so it might come too quickly. Those kinds of things can be rectified and clarified so that people can feel as though there's an equal opportunity. But part of it is there's a lot in the employee handbook, but do people really understand the handbook? There's a sense of people need to have that shared with them of how that works. And if someone is not promoted or given an opportunity, what are the career steps that they might take? What else might they need to learn? So it's giving people that opportunity for advancement in the future.
Okay. And I think the one that I really would like to dig down a little bit more into is, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review any of this, but the revised exit interview, because I think when somebody's leaving an organization, they're going to tell you damn how they feel about it. And I've seen that across the board. So, from that perspective is, why do they want this revised? What's the concerns there? Or can you share anything with us that you heard?
Well, again, from what we found, that's been inconsistent. The exit interviews are inconsistent. We really advocate for stay interviews so that you have interviews with people before they leave so that they want to stay and find out what, especially those employees that are so critical to the organization. We do want to understand why people leave, obviously. That's so important. And it was inconsistent, Bill, of how that was done, or some employees were asked those questions and others not, evidently. And so what is a consistent process for that? But again, we would just want to think about if you can get people, what you really want is people to stay.
Well, I guess the concern that I have, depending on how the community looks at this, we are the elected leaders, but there is some separation between how the manager does his job with the employees and what we're allowed to see and what we're not allowed to see as elected leaders in regards to their personnel files.
Right.
And we have exit interviews that are going on, and there may be an overarching theme to these exit interviews that we're not aware of, that are not going to be shared with us unless we ask for it. Maybe the manager will give it to us, maybe they won't. I have no idea in respect to the legal aspect of that. But I do think that gives me a broader understanding of where the organization is right now, a snapshot, because we all hear different things from employees that will share things with us, that they maybe get to know us and feel comfortable in saying these things. Whether they're true or not, we don't know. But what I'm beginning to see is a theme here, and I guess that's where I want to delve down more into that theme.
And that's part of what you saw with us recommending some core areas, is that what kind of consistent training do managers, leaders, supervisors need that will help them do the things that are going to help employees thrive, right? And so, do you want to respond to?
I just want to say, Mr. Mayor, I think we've been inconsistent in the way in which we've conducted the exit interviews. I think we've also not done anything with the data, to be honest with you. And so that's one of the emphasis that will come out of this report, is that we will try to find a way to be consistent, do something with the data, and then report on those trends as well. And I certainly don't have any problem sharing that information with council.
And that's usually what happens, where you can see if those themes, and that Mary will be working on that, I'm sure, I saw her head going up and down, is that allows you to see where there may be gaps and what you may need to do differently, or if there are particular recurring themes or issues that you can address. And you can begin to get that too with those stay interviews. You know, where are the gaps? So let's close those gaps so that we can create the kind of organization that you all want.
Okay, very good. Yes,
I was looking at number 2 with the culture and behavior, and under the bottom, the last.
Number 2, you want me to go back to that one?
You don't have to. It says address issues that historically marginalized employees experience. What were some of those? Can you tell me some of those?
Some of the
experiences that they
well, I mean, you know, this came about with a variety, and I'll let any of my colleagues are happy to join in, and Marilee too, so I'm not the only voice, since I was not the only one doing this. But some of those comments were around, you know, it could have been around gender, for example, and how some people were treated differently based on something that came up around pregnancies or something like that. It could also be that ignored in those comments and feedback of what they gave, or wondering about who was promoted and who was not. So there were all those are the kinds of comments that we got with those 800 comments, and then followed through with the focus groups to get even more detail. And several of our colleagues had some of John, do you want to respond to any of that?
There were a variety of responses to questions like that. It depends on sometimes the department they were working with, and they felt like it was a theme within the agency, and sometimes they felt like it was an overreaching theme throughout the city. Some felt more informed than others about things, and I think what Kitty mentioned someone mentioned a few minutes ago that they found out last minute about opportunities and things like that. So I think consistency is one of the things that was lacking, and one of the things picking up talking, actually being involved in those focus groups like I was in some of the interviews, sometimes those things would glean through. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what
Was there a department that like stood out as doing it really well, as well as in a department that stood out as not doing it so well? Did you?
I mean, we didn't look at each department, but there were stories that were told. And we know that some EMT members, for example, took paper copies of the questionnaire out to their field, because they wanted to get all their voices and knew that they wouldn't have access to a computer the same way. So those are the things to me that are really important when they understand that that would not have been equitable because they wouldn't have had the same kind of access. So sometimes we think of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and several of the things that you've heard today are around access, that all employees, I don't care who you are, that you have that opportunity. That's what's so great about what you're doing, is that the rise is for everybody, that everybody has an opportunity.
Sometimes we also get the best ideas from the people that are in the field doing the job every single day, whether it's picking up the trash or cutting tree limbs or whatever the case may be. They're out there doing it every single day. So they may figure out ways to do things better than maybe what a supervisor thinks they should be doing. But the supervisor has power over that individual. I want to see the best ideas come forward. I think we all do. Whether it's going to save the taxpayers money and to provide and deliver the services in a more efficient and effective manner.
And that's where more of a structure around a listening architecture that makes sure that those ideas bubble up and that we really do find ways that there's not a blockage there for some reason. One of the things that we did here is, and there's several people and EMT members and leaders that go out to the field, but there are others that don't. So it's how do we get people to really see that people want to see them, that you can learn from that visibility and conversation, formally and informally.
Mr. Anderson.
Morning.
Morning.
Thank you for your presentation. Pretty high level for a Monday morning, but I tried to have a couple questions. I hope I can express them so you understand or you can respond.
Okay.
The first one is if you look at I wrote down like category 2 is theme 1 is confusion about how best candidates are hired and promoted. Theme 3 in that same category is perception of favoritism, lack of transparency, and career development. And then category 3, theme 4, the perception of lack of transparency. In my work career outside of this board and the city, that is like, I'd love to hear, I guess, how you prevent against that, because every time someone gets hired, there's someone else that thinks they were better for the job, and there's always, if you work your rear end off and you get whatever educations and depends on the job, but you do everything it takes, and then you don't get it, you're like, well, he likes me better than me or something. So I mean, how do you guard against that? I mean, if you solve that, you guys ought to be really going to become a very expensive, even more expensive consultation group. I mean, how do you guard against that? I mean, you just expressly tell them this is why they were hired and you weren't?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is clarity. Sometimes it may be even that what we have seen, and I don't know about here.
I understand.
Neil, but
I'd just love to know how you conquer that, because you're going to have a lot of people calling you.
Part of it is sometimes people don't have the courage to tell someone that they're not qualified at this time. And so and it's really clarity around what would you need to do to be considered and be a viable candidate. And we find that particularly with a culture that's very polite, we don't often say the hard truths to people and give clear, direct feedback about what works and what doesn't. In addition to that, what we find is that there is, what we heard anyway, through our interview process, that it wasn't always clear when an opportunity was available and how people could apply. And so in those cases, you can see how I didn't even know about it.
Sure.
Right. So there's not just one right answer to that. It's looking at the picture, but there are ways to help people not be a disgruntled employee once they haven't been selected, if there's more clarity in those responses. It's also about the job descriptions, and we put something about that too, of what you're truly looking for and making sure that you are doing that. There was something.
I think that's key, because a lot of times two resumes can look awfully alike.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's very hard to tell a person that it's personality, or it's your ability to command, to get respect or command. I mean, how you tell somebody that's pretty, nobody wants to hear that, but
Well,
that's what, at the end of the day, it was about. So, I mean, somewhere it needs to be spelled out in your job description that we're looking at somebody that can lead people, that can, it's a
Demonstrate it, behaviors.
Right.
And we often talk about, and I'm sure with your experience, looking at behavioral interviews, so that the interview process too is about specific behaviors that people have demonstrated in the past. And so it's not just hypothetical, what would you do if? It is, what have you done to overcome X, or what have you done to demonstrate that your creativity with problem solving with an employee, whatever it might be.
Right.
So to me, and again, my colleagues have I'm not the only voice to express. Okay, thank you.
It's not often that I can call attention to a silver bullet, but there is a silver bullet in
I'm ready.
response to maybe it's the only one. I'm reminded of a number, and I think I'm recalling this correctly, about 40% of your employees agreed with the statement, my supervisor talks with me about my career. That means 60% of your employees don't find much interest in that direction. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of times, supervisors don't feel that they're prepared. Nobody ever did that with me, so how can I do that with them? And they don't know what the opportunities are. There are a lot of reasons for it. It's not that the supervisors are ignorant or bad. They're focused on getting the work done. There are a lot of reasons for it, but I'm saying if you had one thing that would impact the perceived fairness of promotions, that would be one. Simply having career conversations with people. A short story. I was involved in a merger of a company called PricewaterhouseCoopers and Lybrand. I was on the global merger team, and we wanted to keep all our employees. We're going to 70-person firms to 140,000 in 40 countries or more. What was the single most important thing we did to do that? We trained all of the supervisors to be career coaches. Every single employee had a discussion about, well, where are you at in your career? What are the competencies? Where do you think you can go? Our turnover was virtually zero in that worldwide adventure. And as you know, mergers and acquisitions don't often have a positive story around them. So I guess in support of what Kitty said, what the supervisors do or not do is really the source of most leverage, as I think my colleagues recognize.
No, only thing I was going to say about the career piece, when people don't feel like they get a chance to find out why they did not, you could create policy, but the practices have to be consistent with that, with every level and the flow of information. But you can also find, from my experiences, is that even though when you open that up and really want people to come and find out why they were not promoted, very few do. they don't like hearing the negative or why it was not good enough. And that's still going to be an issue, even if you have the best policy and make it open. Some will maybe not participate and still complain, even though they had opportunity to hear why they were not qualified, why they were not chosen. But you have to you have to have the policy, and you have to create the practice, and it has to be consistent regardless of what they do. You know, that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think it would be policy, if we need to have a policy where then you say, here's, you don't necessarily, you just give them some things to improve on, you know,
Yes,
there may be,
exactly.
but
Exactly.
my other one is, it's probably a little big picture, but it just as your word of the day, it cascades down to all this. I mean, look at category 1, theme 1, polarities and opinions and feelings about DEI initiative. Well, that sounds like a statement about where our country is right now.
I know.
So, and then you look at category 3, theme 1, concern that DEI efforts will equal preferential treatment. How do you guard against people perceiving this as reverse discrimination? How do we?
It's again.
Because that's where that.
Right.
That's that polarity. People are going, I don't know about this program. What's it mean to me? You know, and what we're trying to achieve is just equity.
Exactly.
But yet people will perceive it as, I mean, I think today is getting tried in the Supreme Court, you know, admissions policies at 2 universities. I mean, this is.
It is.
I don't know how do you guard against it? Any recommendations?
Well, I mean, I wish you, Neil, could have been in it was, you know, a confidential process with the 26 people. But one of the things that John Furcon did was to summarize some of the comments that people made. And because of the dialogue that they had and talking to each other and going through all these recommendations, it moved a lot of people. They'd even talked about that they had such a better understanding, not to be talked at, but to have a dialogue with. And that's what we find is so critical and is often missing, is that we check the box that we've done this training and we've done that training. However, it's the dialogue among people so that they can understand each other better. We do have polarities for sure.
You talking about the group of 26 or the bigger?
Yeah, that 26 for sure, that first 26. But they want to continue talking, and they will be champions with others when they go back to their departments and say what happened and what they learned. And so what?
It's hard to get 1,000.
Well, yeah, I mean, but there are ways to do that in a cascaded format of getting people to have those conversations, and that goes back to supervisors who are communicating. The success factors for something like this are that the communication continues, that you engage all the people continually engaging them, that there are those, Luke mentioned kind of the dashboard and benchmarks, that you are measuring and making sure that you're continuing to look at these things. We've also found that sometimes it's really working in the middle group that are undecided and helping them, because there's a lot of confusion. So you'll see in the recommendations clarifying understanding. In the report, you'll see definitions, because people have a lot of misconceptions and fears of what this is going to take away.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. A lot of work here. Appreciate it. Hello?
And now Mary.
Yep. It is I.
I'm sorry.
I don't know how I can say this. I'm just not hearing what I expected to hear. As far as I just thought we were going to dig deeper and really get to the issues that we face as a organization. And I'm not negating the work that Intellect has done. But I think Neil made a great point when he just said, how do we ensure that people don't think that it's reverse discrimination? And I think that's a really popular trend right now. So based on that, we may not go as far as we need to go as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we tend to play around where it's safe. I understand that. But just what I'm hearing, and maybe it's too early for me. Maybe I haven't had my coffee yet. But I'm just not hearing some of the things that I hear when I talk to people in our organization. And so if I'm not hearing those things, I'm certain we don't get the opportunity to face those things. And that's my biggest concern. And that mindset of what Neil stated previously is really how we conduct business. Instead of facing an issue, we tend to worry about the backlash from the backlash. It's counterproductive.
I'd like to address that concern if I could.
Of course, Marilyn.
Please do.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kevin. And I'm just really appreciating all of your questions. When you get the final report, you are going to see specific quotes from focus groups, and they reflect perceptions that people have. And we found great dichotomies in perception, a lot of it based on what department you're in. You know, for some people, working in the city is a wonderful, fulfilling experience with lots of opportunity. And for some people, and I think you're referencing this, it is a marginalizing experience. And all of those voices were heard, and all of those are recorded in the report. We had tears in focus groups. We had focus groups that ran over their time, went 2 hours and said, oh my gosh, we've got to keep talking. So there was a lot of very real conversation that we heard. And so that's all in the report. And and you're really speaking of the specific things you have heard. And we heard specifics on all sides and everything in between. But all those experiences matter, right? So you can say, 70% feel this way positive, 30% don't. And so those 30% are also a concern, right? So what we did was translate the experiences and perceptions into very specific recommendations. So I think if you get to read those, 28 recommendations under this topic and that topic, I think you will find, I hope you will find things that address the things you have heard directly from people.
Well, thank you. That eases my concern a tad, because that's what people want to hear. We've waited a while. It's been over a year to conduct this thing. And, when you listen to people, not only just people within our organization, but people within our community and peers, people want to see full participation. People want to see us actually pull the hood back and get under there and see what our issue is, not what's perceived as being our issue, but what our issue really is. And so in that confidentiality, you are allowing some people to exactly say how they feel about certain things, right, wrong, or indifferent. And that's how we get to a solution. So that's my biggest concern. So thank you, Marilyn. I'm glad somebody understood. Everybody was looking puzzled.
Mayor and Council, one element I wanted to highlight was on the survey methodology. We were intentional by not asking questions which are generally essential with a survey. What department do you work in? What is your gender? And some other things that would have given us more information. And that was intentional because the sense of safety, the issues surrounding this topic are layered and complex. And so while you ask us what department said this or that, we don't know unless they volunteered, I work in this department. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and it's probably even more critical, at the time of the survey with the 452 responses and 800 comments written in, we had about 120 to 130 positions unfilled. So we were closer to 50% of the filled positions responding. Anytime you can get 30% or more survey response, that's very high. And one question we hear is, well, was it just one person that said this, or 10? Or was it 400 people that said this comment? And it's really critical that we understand sometimes the number that may say something in terms of their experience, we can't discount it simply because it's not the majority of the workforce. But what we have seen is a lot of interest in the work. Some efforts have been underway during the course of this assessment, and it's really critical that we understand this is a snapshot in time. Mr. Ravenberg.
A lot of what I've heard here today and what I've read and seen, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be handled if you all had never come along, but you've come along and reminded us. So I've kind of worked on my own most of my life, but I have had supervisors in some of my work history, and you have good ones and you have bad ones. And the good ones nurture you, or they bring you along, and they're the ones that continue to rise themselves because they're that kind of good supervisor. The other ones probably don't. So we have city manager and several deputy city managers, and we have an excellent senior staff, and that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. They've got to understand that these things that we're talking about, posting jobs, when you do evaluations annually, that's a good time. You don't add up the negatives. You talk about the gains, and say, you know, you've come this far, and you know you can get here. And telling somebody what they did wrong or why they didn't get it doesn't have to be negative. You can make that a positive, and this is how you can get there. And supervisors and department heads, I mean, the first time I ever had to fire somebody, I gnashed my teeth over it for 2 days, and finally a wise man that I knew, he said, they fired themselves, you're just letting them know. And it didn't make it easier, but I understood it in a different light. So a lot of, and of course, the balance of the stuff is not an easy overnight fix. But there's a lot of stuff that we can do that will go a long ways toward alleviating some of the comments that these people have made. I get it, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You know, the real excitement is that we have a capable team that's going to take this information and begin putting it into place. And so I want to turn the floor over to Mary and her team, and thank you for your attention. She's going to take you through the next steps, where do we go from here. And it's my expectation you should have the report within 2 weeks to consume individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Rivenbark. You just set me up perfectly. So before I even begin, good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I am excited to be standing in front of you this morning to talk about what's next. Now that we've received the report, we understand the recommendations. How are we moving forward as an organization in order to do this work? I do want to begin just with a note of gratitude, and it's been talked a lot today, but we continue to thank you for your support in this area and the work that we do. Big thank you to Tom, who has worked on this tirelessly for years and will continue to work on this and help us. The work of Intellect, who has been instrumental in helping us, you know, work with employees, complete the surveys, and do those work. I also want to recognize the employees that have participated to date. As mentioned, 452 employees completed the survey and provided over 800 comments. We had participation in 13 focus groups. And finally, we recently had a month-long process to evaluate, rank, and offer feedback on each of those recommendations. And so this work we couldn't do without our employees, and so we appreciate them. I do want to spend a moment to talk about some of the work that's already been done. Intellect mentioned that in some areas, the city's already moved forward even before the study was complete. Thanks to council and their commitment, we have hired personnel. And so Joe Conway is our Chief E&I Officer, Amy is his specialist, support specialist, and so together we already have a team in place that has hit the ground running. We've been able to offer various trainings across the organization and continue to look for other ways to engage both the employees and supervisors. We've been working on some partnerships across the organization. We've been working extensively with HR and our policy review. I know it was mentioned already about the employee handbook, so we continue to look at that and make improvements. We've been partnering with New Hanover County and their Office of Equity and Inclusion on various projects. We work with several boards and commissions, and we continue to look at project specific. We've been working on an equity and inclusion toolbox for the organization, language access. We've been working on various proclamations as a community. And so even though today we're just finally getting the report, we continue as an organization over the last year to try to make strides in other ways for our Rise Together initiative. So what are the next steps? So we will work with department heads on the creation of an employee DEI team. And so this may be people that have already been involved, this may be new, but really wanting to get a cross-departmental representation so that we really can understand and work with employees and engage them. They will assist us in what we're calling the development of a DE&I roadmap. And so with the information and feedback provided from Intellect and the report, we will produce a roadmap that identifies the following. It will take those 200 recommendations and turn them into strategies. It'll describe the resources that are needed, how we will measure success, and what those milestones will look like. So what is that dashboard? What information are we going to collect along the way? And how are we going to show the community we're successful in what we're doing? The roadmap will also outline council updates and opportunities for engagement. We plan on bringing this roadmap back to you in January and February for your consideration, so you can see what those next steps we're going to take as we move forward in the organization. And so, keeping it nice and brief, I'll take any questions that City Council may have.
Mary, just you made a comment about outreach, and there's 7 of us up here. We represent different groups of people, tribes, whatever you want to call it. And everybody has friends and what have you. And sometimes when we're talking about outreach, I think you should use the resources of us also, and to please engage us in that, because in regards to maybe opportunities to obtain city contracts, I mean, it's always been an issue. And if the jobs are not here, or if the company's not here, can we go outside of this region or outside of this area? I know that was a discussion that we had, I think in our last budget meeting, about being able to bring more people on to the purchasing department. I know that Mr. Parker's overwhelmed there by, I think, him and another person, to be able to look for opportunities that may not even exist here in New Hanover County, the city of Wilmington, but outside of our city. And I think that hopefully we're starting that. But as far as outreach, I think it's very important that you reach out to every one of us, because every one of us has different people, different organizations that we have close ties to that we can help with you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mayor, and that's a perfect opportunity, and I think that's part of what the roadmap will highlight, is when we'll be bringing items to you and get feedback and work with you through the entire process.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Okay. I've been asked to go into closed session. Do you have something else? Okay. I have been asked to go into a closed session or to have a motion to enter into a closed session pursuant to the provisions of General Statute 143-318-11A3, in order for the City Council to, number 1, consult with and provide instruction to the City Attorney regarding potential legal claims, including the case of the Funk Yard LLC versus the City of Wilmington, file number 21 CVS 2790. And I will also note that the closed session will be held in the City Attorney's conference room, and at the end of the closed session, council will reopen its public session and adjourn from that location without returning to council chambers. So, do we have a motion?
Offer the motion, sir.
Do we have a motion by Mr. Barnett, second by Mr. Anderson. Vote. Aye. Councilmember Brian Bark, how do you vote? Aye. Councilmember Anderson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilmember Barnett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilmember Spears, how do you vote? Councilmember Spears? Councilmember Spears? Okay, Councilmember Waddell? And the chair's aye. Okay, we will now meet, we will now go into closed session and meet in the city attorney's conference room.